Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello listeners. Tonight's story is going to be largely set in an enclosed space. Just a few kilometers off the coast of Vancouver lies Bowen Island, a quaint and picturesque spot that embodies small-town Canada. With a population hovering just around 4,500 people, its economy is driven by small local businesses with a sprinkle of tourism. Life on Bowen Island is typically calm and predictable, in stark contrast to the bustling pace of nearby Vancouver. Here, on Bowen Island, everyone knows everyone, and surprises are few and far between. However, on a Friday in June of 2009, this peaceful island provided the setting for the brand of mystery much more fitting for the big city. 17-year-old Jodi Henrickson boarded the ferry from the mainland, planning to spend a weekend partying with some friends on Bowen Island. Well, some friends and her ex-boyfriend Gavin, who had a court order to stay away from her. As the night unfolded, something seemed to happen to Jodi. What exactly occurred remains unknown, but what we do know is that she was last seen in the early morning hours alone with her ex-boyfriend Gavin. The specifics of his account of what happened remains between him and the police as the investigation is still ongoing. However, the versions of the story that have reached the public raise more questions than they do answers. That all said, the police aren't the only ones trying to piece together this puzzle. For several years, a documentary team led by filmmaker Jenni Baynham has been meticulously analyzing every detail of the case. They believe they're on the path to uncovering the truth. Tonight, we're going to hear all about it. In this episode of Nighttime, we're going to be joined by Jenni Baynham, who is here to discuss the same question that has consumed her and her team for years. Where is Jodi Henrickson?
It's one of BC's most tragic mysteries. On June 19, 2009, 17-year-old Jodi Henrickson disappeared on Bowen Island after leaving a house party with her ex-boyfriend. To this day, there has been no sign of her and no arrests have been made. Investigators believe she's the victim of foul play. Jodi, who lived with her family in Squamish, told her parents she was going camping at Cultus Lake. Instead, she went to Bowen Island to party with friends. Jodi left the Harding Road party with her ex-boyfriend sometime after 4 a.m. The two had a stormy relationship. At around 6:30 in the morning, the pair were spotted near the Miller's Landing turnoff. It's believed the two were arguing on the side of the road and that her ex turned his back to her and walked away. Gavin was the last person to see her. He was a person of interest in her disappearance, but there has been no conclusive evidence to charge him.
So let's start with you, Jenni. Why don't you tell me a bit about you and your background and why you have such a nice accent?
So I am originally from Glasgow in Scotland, and I moved to Vancouver about 10 years ago. I have always been a journalist by trade, and then fell into entertainment, and not the kind of entertainment that really utilized my journalism muscle, because I was making HGTV shows and Christmas movies until someone told me about Jodi, and I guess for the first time in a while my curiosity was piqued, and then it ruined the next 4 years of my life.
Yeah. Well, they say when you're a journalist and you have that in you, that doesn't go away. Even if you're making Christmas movies for HGTV, the right story comes up and touches you, and it all comes pouring back, as clearly it did with you. Now, when I first got in touch with you, it was the first time I had heard about Jodi Henrickson and the search for her and all the details related to her disappearance. How did you find out about Jodi? And of course, I want to know, like, what made this story connect with you so deeply?
Yeah, so about 4 years ago, my business partner's friend kind of reached out to say she was a journalist who lived on Bowen Island, and that 15 years ago, she had moved her family to Bowen Island because they've been traveling all over the world and living in crazy places and covering crazy things. And she wanted to move her family to the most peaceful place on earth. So
Mm,
she randomly chose Bowen Island, moves there. 4 days later, a teenage girl disappears literally outside her house.
mhm,
And police say the body never left the island. The girl never left the island, and she was never found. And so this lovely lady, Amelia Thomas, was telling us about how she was considering writing a book on this because the island has always had whispers
mhm,
over the past 15 years of what happened. And I could not wrap my head around how the island is less than 50 square kilometers and they never found her.
mhm, mhm,
That's as simple as it was for me in the beginning. So I asked Amelia not to write her book, and if we could team up on a documentary instead.
okay.
But the first thing I wanted to do, obviously, was reach out to the family because though it seems so superficial and so easy for me to say, hey, there's a body on an island, and I think we could probably find it if we tried hard enough. Over the years, it's become so much more than an it or a story. It's a her and a person and a
Mm,
loving family. And so, what kind of intrigued me in the beginning, now in hindsight, feels really stupid and really gross. But I
mhm,
think at the time, I consumed true crime like so many of us do. And I was maybe a little disconnected from the actual impact it would have on my life and this huge gap in these people's lives
mhm.
that Jodi has left.
Hmm. Bowen Island that place is new to me. I hadn't heard of Bowen Island before I started reading about Jodi's disappearance. And you said it yourself. This is a tiny little, should be very peaceful place without any story. But I think a lot of people listening will have never heard of Bowen Island before. So maybe let's start there. Tell me a little bit about this place. And I assumed you visited Bowen Island by now.
I have been to Bowen Island a lot
I bet.
for the first 2 years plus of this investigation. I think I thought I was visiting Bowen Island undercover. And I have since learned that they have known exactly what I've been doing and exactly how long I've been doing it for.
Hmm.
Bowen Island is a tiny island, less than 50 square kilometers off the coast of Vancouver. It used to be filled with people and families whose names literally form the names of the roads. So there's Harding Road, there's Arnott Road, there's Smith Road, there's Miller Road, and those families are still on the island. And I ask everyone the same question: how long does it take to be considered a local on Bowen Island? And the answer I get back is 20 years. It took 20 years for them to consider
Yeah.
you a local. And strangely, over the last kind of 10 years, it's become a very popular destination for wealthy Vancouverites who, can get a waterfront mansion and some land, and it's
Mhm,
a 20-minute ferry ride to the mainland. So
mhm,
there's become this real juxtaposition between the OG old school Bowen Islanders who know each other, know everybody's business, sort of self-govern in a way, and then kind of wealthy artists, wealthy
mhm,
lawyers who go there for a different kind of reason. And if they stick it out long enough, then they're invited to the parties. And if they don't stick it out long enough, then nobody misses them.
I got you. And you mentioned a ferry ride. Is that the only way onto Bowen Island by ferry?
Yeah. So you can only access Bowen by ferry. There are a lot of people, obviously, who have private boats,
Hmm.
which is what took up a lot of my time in this
I
investigation
bet.
was who had private boats and where did they go and how was that investigated. But on the face of it, what we have here is a very contained crime scene.
Hmm.
And I think also on the face of it, nothing should happen on this island. But over the past 4 years, I have stumbled across four young people's deaths in a fairly condensed time period that for a population of less than 3,000 at the time just is hugely disproportionate to the mainland over here when we're talking about juvenile crime and juvenile
Hmm.
fatalities. So it became very strange to me the more I got into Bowen Island.
Interesting. Now, you said at the time, Bowen Island had about 3,000 people. And when you say at the time, I assume you're talking about mid-June of 2009 when Jodi was last seen on Bowen Island. Before we get to that, though, let's talk a little bit about her because I know one of the, aside from Bowen Island, you've been digging deep into Jodi's life, the people she was associated with, friends and family. Tell me about Jodi at the time of her disappearance. What was she like? What was her background?
Yeah, so Jodi has a really wonderful family. She has a mom, a dad, two brothers, lovely cousins. Um, you probably read the same media quote as me, um, from someone involved in this case, labeling her as troubled and a runaway.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons the case did not receive as much coverage as it deserved, because one person says that about somebody, and all of a sudden we're all victim blaming. We're all thinking, oh, well, she's just one of those kind of people, which, by the way, those kind of people absolutely deserve to be missed and loved
Hmm.
and investigated anyway.
Hmm.
But in Jodi's case, Jodi was loved, popular, loud, funny. It wouldn't surprise me if she was running a company today. She was 2 years younger than me. She was a leader. Like, people gravitated to her. Um, and in this weird way, her two best friends, Tiffany and Chelsea, like, I have a group chat with them. We chat almost every day. And in this like really strange way, I can't help but draw a parallel between what she would be doing now and what I'm doing now with her loved ones.
Interesting.
Because honestly, the people in her world are 10 out of 10 people.
Hmm.
Like, I would have them at my house for dinner. And so I think that speaks to who Jodi is.
Hmm.
Like, that she has these people in her life that are so wonderful because she was so wonderful.
Hmm. And now, when news reports calling her like troubled or a runaway or anything like that, she was only 17 years old at the time of her disappearance. So, like we're all a little troubled and somewhere between runaway and mad at our parents when we're 17. So I think like when I read the details of her disappearance, I think initially it was a little tainted by hearing a quote like that and thinking, oh, she was probably into drugs and this risky lifestyle. But none of that comes into play at all. She was just a 17-year-old who went to a party not far from her house, and somehow throughout that night she ends up vanishing. So it's like to paint the story with even mentioning, whether or not she was troubled. It just it does a big disservice for anybody who's looking for her, I think.
Jodi didn't run away. Like, Jodi was due to get her braces off in a couple of months. And I think
Mm.
any 17-year-old girl, like, you're going nowhere. You're getting those suckers off your face
Yeah,
before you.
yeah. I'm gonna run away once my teeth look normal and I don't
I
have to
know, like,
yeah.
was that good?
Yeah.
Um, but you spoke about like you doing stupid stuff when you're a teenager. I did stupid stuff when we were a teenager. Like, we can move on and forget about it. But I think that the thing that is really haunting me through all of this, and when I sat across from Jodi's mom and like I look in her eyes, the last 2 years of Jodi's life were colored by a toxic teenage
Hmm.
relationship.
Hmm.
And for context, when I talk about this relationship, I am not talking about it being related to Jodi's disappearance necessarily. I'm just talking about your teenager dating a teenager that is not a healthy relationship between two people. And when teenagers are in love and teenagers are feeling like they're against all odds and whatever, you lie to your parents. You get
Hmm.
your cell phone cut off because you're not supposed to speak to them. You sleep in their truck instead of going home at night and your parents don't know where you are. You sneak out. And so it is irrelevant of whether she lied to her parents or not about what she was doing because she was a teenager. But in some ways, it's also incredibly relevant because unfortunately, that was the last 2 years of her life.
Hmm. And we'll get a bit more into that, but even to say like a toxic or troubled relationship and the roller coaster of teenage love, like that's all an understatement with Jodi's case because that happens to all of us or most of us, but very rarely are there criminal charges associated with it and court documents related to teenage love that isn't going well. But we'll come back to that. Let's get into the time leading up to her disappearance. So I thought we could just talk through a bit of a timeline of what brings Jodi to Bowen Island and what she gets up to while there, because it's really like the timeline is it's it's a pretty condensed time because it's really she gets there that evening and the next morning is when she's last seen. So maybe you can start it just by walking us through what brings Jodi Henrickson to Bowen Island on June 18th of 2009, I believe is a Friday night that she arrives.
The bit that always sticks with me out of this story is if you speak to Tiffany, Jodie's best friend at the time, Tiffany would 90% of the time have gone with Jodie that weekend.
Hmm.
Like Squamish kids go to Bowen to party. This was not like one event of the year, like they would frequently go to Bowen and camp or party or whatever. So that Friday, Tiffany didn't go. I think she had a family thing on or whatever. And she said, as Jodie got on the bus to get down to the ferry, Tiffany said, see you Monday or whatever. Jodie's like, yeah, see you Monday. And then that was the last time she ever saw her friend.
That Tiffany saw her. And just to be clear, Jodi doesn't live on Bowen Island and had no like connection as far as like housing or anything. She's from Squamish and lived in Squamish, but Bowen Island would be a spot you would go for, like you said, like parties or socializing, I guess.
Totally. And on Bowen, there's a real, I think like any small town, like Bowen is not unique in that because it's so small, there's one bar, there's no nightclubs, there's no whatever. So you go to a party, there's probably a bigger age range of
Mm,
people at that party than
mm,
there would be, if you're going to like a high school party. So she had friends on Bowen. It wasn't like she was showing up and didn't know anyone. She had friends of varying ages. Um, so when she gets on the bus and she goes to the ferry terminal, she bumps into some people at that ferry terminal that I think were surprised to see her there. Because as you know, Jodie had recently had a no contact order with her ex, and the ex, his dad lived on Bowen. The party was at his best friend's house. So Jodie telling people she was going to Chilliwack was to kind of distract from. I don't think she wanted many people knowing she was going to Bowen to try and stop her. So she arrived on Bowen. She went to her friend's house first. They kind of did whatever they were doing for a couple of hours. That was a group of them. So, and then she goes to this notorious party that everyone has talked about. Um, I wouldn't say she was welcomed there
mm,
because I think teenagers are selfish, and I think a lot of people knew that there was a no contact order, and the people that were involved in the no contact order were there at the party. So there was a like, or can we get in trouble from
hmm.
this
Yeah,
going
because it,
on?
yeah, and again, just to be clear, is Jodi's ex-boyfriend who they had domestic violence of some sort between them. We'll get into that a bit more. There was a no contact order between them. Um, Jodi's ex's best friend is a 22-year-old named Doug Harding. It's his home that the party's at. So of course her ex is going to be there, and that's what she's kind of going into on Bowen Island. Do we have or have you come across any information that would lead you to believe that she was going there to see her ex-boyfriend, or was it just a coincidence that he was there? Like I'm just wondering if she was going there to connect with this ex.
I would say even if we strip it back to just like common sense, like she
Mm,
was not particularly friendly with Doug Harding. Doug Harding was her ex-boyfriend's friend, and she goes out of her way to go to that house knowing who's going to be there. So I think she played with fire, and I think she was the sort of person to play with fire.
mhm.
But I think unfortunately going to Bowen that weekend burned her. Sources have told me that she was confronted by people who were like, you shouldn't be here. This is not a good situation. People were very inebriated to the point that car keys had been removed. People were being tied to poles so that they wouldn't drunk drive or do something stupid.
Mhm.
She left. She stayed for a while and she left.
Mhm. And I don't know if you can clear this up, but one of the articles that I read, that it was an in-depth article, made it sound like it was her ex-boyfriend Gavin who was inebriated and drove a vehicle and his friends took his keys and like duct taped him around a pole to prevent him from getting in his vehicle. Are you able to confirm that like you've come across that information as well? Because like that's I think that's shocking if true.
I've had it confirmed from multiple people who were at the party, and I actually also recently got my hands on a picture of it.
Oh my
Of
gosh.
Yeah, so yes, I can confirm. I
Okay.
will say the level of intoxication at that party was not unique to Gavin.
Hmm.
Like you're talking about an island where there's a very minimal police presence. Kids are literally the stories I have heard from that time period. Like I'm from Scotland and I thought we drank a lot, but when I hear about what was happening on Bowen Island 2009, like they should have canceled those ferries. Like these
Mm.
West Van and Squamish kids should not have been over there in the Wild West. So I think someone almost driving their truck into a house and being duct taped to a pole to stop them doing anything stupid might be really shocking to you or me in this moment. But I also think it was almost commonplace on the weekends in
Wow.
2009 there.
Okay. Bowen Island was a different place then than where I grew up, I suppose. But let's get back to it. So Jodi is at the party at Doug's. Her ex, she would have seen him there, duct taped to a pole at least at one point. She leaves briefly from that party at Doug's to at least the reporting of it describes it as going to another party, but what is a party? But she at least left temporarily from the party.
Yeah, she left temporarily from the party. She went to another, I would call it a gathering, and then she went back to Doug Harding's.
Okay, so she ends up back there late at night. My understanding as well is when she returns, by that point, her ex Gavin, I don't believe is awake and partying anymore. He's like he's asleep, I guess, in his like buddy's house, which Jodi decides to go see him and wake him up. I don't know like where this story would have come from because he would have been the only one who would have been able to explain this, Gavin. So I'm guessing this comes from police interviews or something. But are you able to tell me how we know about these moments of between Gavin and Jodi and them leaving the party together?
I would say that your assessment of there's only one person who was able to talk to that is accurate.
Okay. So she gets back to Doug's house, gets her ex-boyfriend Gavin up, and the two of them end up leaving. Can you kind of retrace their footsteps from, and what we know about her last hours?
Yeah, I can. And I think, something that really has kept me up at night a lot is why they left.
Hmm.
Now, you're Jodi, you technically have nowhere to sleep on the island. She has friends, but she doesn't have her phone on her. Her phone had been cut off a few months before. The bit that we have really struggled with is there's a bed right there. He's in it. However, people at the party had said they were uncomfortable with her being there. So maybe she didn't want to sleep there, but also his truck is right outside. And they slept in his truck a lot, like a
Mm,
lot.
okay.
And so that's been a really big question mark for us. Again, not that it's particularly relevant, but just something I've wondered.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like if you're uncomfortable at that party, you shut the bedroom door. You go to sleep. You deal with it in the morning. Like it would surprise me that they would decide to leave altogether. Go stay in the truck maybe, but maybe it's just too hot in the truck at night and in June. I just feel like staying in the house would have been the obvious choice, especially if, by all accounts, Gavin had been drunk, had puked, almost drove his truck into the house earlier. It just seems like just climbing into that bed and shutting the bedroom door would have been the easy solution. Who likes to go trucking around Bowen Island at night with a headache, probably?
Or even like, and again, I'm just talking this out as in literally what happened in the window we're looking at. This is not relating to anything after. Doug Harding's house was right next door to Gavin's dad's house.
Hmm.
Now, Gavin wasn't technically allowed to stay at his dad's house that weekend because his dad and his stepmom were away on holiday, and I think, a lot of people don't trust their children to be in their house alone because goodness knows what kind of parties or whatever could have ended up there. But it just seemed really strange that they chose to leave at about 3 o'clock in the morning and embark on this. I mean, it ended up taking them 3.5 hours. So we know they stopped along the way because we timed out the walk and it was nowhere near 3.5 hours. But so they walked for an hour and a half, were spotted by someone at the elementary school, which is about halfway on this kind of crusade to where they were last seen. They asked for a lift to a home that was being renovated, that Gavin's dad owned and that Gavin was there working on that weekend.
Okay. He would have had access to this house.
That's where he was staying. Yeah, that's where he was staying.
Okay.
So they asked for a lift to there or at 4:30 a.m. They're told no from this person who wants to go home and sleep, which I understand.
I get that.
He was working all night. They then walk for another 2 hours. Again, it's not a 2-hour walk. So obviously stops were happening or conversations were being had to where they're last seen at 6:30 a.m. on Miller Road. And this is kind of this, I swear all the time you have to cut this out, but I just call it like a media fuck up. This was just a media fuck up, and I don't know another way to say it. When they were last seen, the way it was phrased was on the road to the ferry. They were last seen on the road to the ferry at 6:30 a.m. So that had never made sense to me because they'd been walking north. They told somebody they're walking to this house in Eagle Cliff. They're walking towards the house on Eagle Cliff. They're walking north.
Yeah,
But
and
then,
Eagle Cliff is on Bowen Island still.
yes. It's up. It's kind of northeast, and the party they were at was kind of southwest-ish. And so they're seen walking north on the road to this house, but then you're telling me that they're walking towards the ferry, which means they would have had to have turned around and decided not to go to the house and walk back down south towards the ferry. And that never sat right with me. So we managed to track down the people who had last seen them together and clarify. And they said they were seen looking very disheveled, very tired, walking north on Miller Road. And that was like a light bulb moment for me because I was like, north is to Eagle Cliff, which is where they just told this person that they were going. So the kind of misinformation that the word ferry was even used there for the public, well, they probably had a fight and she got on the ferry, right? Or she was walking towards the ferry, or she met some randomer on the ferry, or just the use of the word ferry there, I believe, skewed this whole narrative and took people's eyes away from the area she was last seen in, which is Eagle Cliff, regardless of who she was with. That's where she was last seen alive. But the use of the word ferry just took people's heads off the island.
It expands that last moment tremendously. It's just whether you add ferry or airport, it just opens this whole other avenue. So yeah, it's a complicated word.
And I don't know what the police actually put out there, but the media reported it as on the road to the ferry, and it was actually the opposite. They were walking away from the ferry. But I think in that 1 second, and we can talk about the window of time it took for the police to get there in a second, but that 1 second removed any chance of anyone remembering that they saw something or they heard something or they noticed something suspicious in that area, because that area was never mentioned. It was irrelevant.
Okay. I understand.
And it's how did that happen?
All that aside, 6:30 a.m. is when they're last seen together, Jodi and her ex-boyfriend Gavin, who the two had a no contact order with due to some prior incidents. Let's learn a bit more about him, because it's, anyone hears the story and hears that she is last seen with an ex-boyfriend that she had a no contact order with, they're going to have a lot of questions for and about Gavin. So maybe tell me a bit about him and about their relationship. What exactly led to this no contact order with a 17-year-old? That just seems unusual to me. So make it make sense.
I don't know if I can make it make sense for you, Jordan.
Okay.
I can tell you that he was charged and convicted of the no contact order 2 weeks before she disappeared. So when we found that timing out, that was another kind of
Hmm.
moment.
Yeah.
But I will say before I go into this person and their relationship that we approached this investigation 4 years by sitting down and writing down every single thing that could have happened. Runaway. Did she get on the ferry? Was she being kept in someone's basement? There was a ton of drink driving and drugs on Bowen. Was she in a drunk driving car crash that people covered up because they didn't want to ruin teenagers' lives? Did she accidentally take something and it went terribly and it was dealt with internally? Like we did not approach this as a witch hunt.
Mhm.
I still do not approach this as a witch hunt. Our methodology has been to take every theory and our job is to rule it out.
Mhm.
And at this moment in time, as I talk to you, there's two theories that I have not been able to rule out. So when I'm talking about Gavin, this is not me saying, here's everything I know about this guy and he did it and blah, 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 because I could not look you in the eye right now and say 100% this person did this.
Mhm.
And I just want to be really clear about that because actually, statistically, I would love it if he didn't do it. Because see if Jodi's story is another domestic violence sad tale where someone is in a toxic relationship that is physical and violent and ends in a fatality, and she becomes a statistic grouped in with these millions of women that meet the end of their life at the hands of a partner. I don't want that for her. Her
Mhm.
personality, her life deserves more than being a number chucked on this pile.
Mhm.
And so I can talk to you about Gavin. I can talk to you about the violence in their relationship and the firsthand accounts I've had of it and why that actually led to her going to the police after so many incidents. It's just, I'm not connecting those things, which are fact, with a theory or an allegation that I'm not able to prove.
Okay, that's fair.
That,
I think it's good to have that on the record because this is not you it, taking a listener's ears and pointing it in the direction of we think Gavin did it. This is you looking at all the facts and seeing where it leads, and I think that's good to have on the record.
yeah. So she met Gavin, she was about 15, met him through her brother. I don't think it's my place to talk about Gavin's life
Hmm.
because I don't know him. I
Okay.
think I will speak to him one day. I've spoken with a lot of people who are very close to him. Um, they had a very publicly toxic relationship where he was very jealous if she did something, which by the way, she would do. See, when I'm hearing these stories, I'm like, oh, Jodi, like, why? But like, I think she liked to poke the bear a little
Hmm.
bit, and it would set him off. And I'm sure you've read that he like choked her in a hot tub in front of their friends. Um, and the incident that led to the police getting involved. And by the way, the hot tub incident and the incident I'm about to talk about were one of multiple public incidents they had where like something would happen. It was a big breakup, big drama. She'd be posting about it on Facebook. He would like chalk a poem to her on the road where everyone got on the school bus, like total love bomb, and then get her back, and then the cycle would repeat.
Mm.
So very common
Hmm.
in toxic relationships, this kind of like love bombing abusive pattern. But the one that kind of uh crossed the line was they were in a room together, they fell out, and she was very noticeably physically um damaged. Whereas before, I think, people had noticed bruises on her arms or what have you, but this was a step too far. And
Mm.
that's when it was kind of decided, no, this is enough. But even after the charges were brought, they were still seeing each other. She was still reaching out to him It was that kind of us against the world
Mm.
teenage obsession, and it makes me really sad. And it's another reason that I hope in a way that he didn't do it, because I don't want people blaming her for anything. And
Mhm.
when people are like, well, she went to see him, or she went back to him, well, she kept in touch with him. It's like, none of that matters.
Mhm.
Nobody deserves to have their life taken from them. So none of that matters. And so, like, it's being in this really weird mental cycle myself where, as I said, there's two main people we're looking into just now. And one of them, the online community, the Reddit community, everyone is like, oh, well, the boyfriend did it. But I hope that he didn't, even though this is not someone that I support,
Mhm.
because I know factually, I've read the same documents that you've read, that this person put their hands on her.
Mhm. Just in speaking about Gavin, yes, his relationship with Jodi was toxic and it went way over the line as we just discussed. But it seemed like in other aspects of his life, he had a bit of I don't know if you want to call it rage or anger issues, but there's a story of him having a fight with his mom and then like either doing it or threatening to set himself on fire with like lighter fluid. Like that doesn't ring to me as the sound of a stable person. Is it like, did you come across other stories of him doing like these unhinged violent things?
Yes, I've heard lots of stories of people recounting times when they felt uneasy or afraid in his presence because of
Okay.
his behavior. I will say about that specific story that you're talking about, I have heard different interpretations of that story
Hmm.
that do not put him as the aggressor in that
Okay.
situation. But again, I was not there. I do
Hmm.
not know him or his mum. I just want to always be really careful. And by the way, I hate myself saying this because, like, I think men who put their hands on women deserve to be behind bars.
Hmm.
That's what I think. I think it's disgusting. I think there's no excuse. I think you can have all the trauma in the world, and that's on you to deal with it. That's on
Hmm.
you to get help. Being physically violent with another person is never going to be okay in my book.
Hmm.
So I don't want to sound like a bloody Gavin apologizer. I just am very conscious that the documentary that we are making and the investigation we're on and the information we have been provided with is going to lead everyone to a certain conclusion. And it's a weight for me to carry.
Hmm. Understand. Enough on Gavin at this point. Let's get back to the timeline. So we just went through what Jodi's night was like up until the 6:30 a.m. early Saturday morning last known sighting. But how does it become a missing persons case? Like who realizes Jodi's unaccounted for? Walk me through that. Like when does this happen?
Mhm. So this is when I was talking about a toxic relationship ruining her life, because I believe that the frequency she began lying to her parents and why she lied to her parents about that weekend resulted in the alarm not being sound until the Wednesday. So this is the Saturday.
Hmm. Yeah. Where did her parents think she was?
Thought she was in Chilliwack.
With like friends or like what was she?
They thought she was in Chilliwack camping with friends. Um, Reminder, she didn't have a phone. Like, she
Mhm.
had her phone cut off because the kind of deal with her mom was like, I'll pay your phone if you have a job.
Okay.
And she'd worked tons, by the way, but I guess at that time she didn't or whatever. And her mom was like, well, that's the rules. Like, see what I tell you? Like, these are good parents. And see if I had a teenager who was like, at best, let's call him a bad boy at best. If I had a young daughter who was dating that kind of person, I'd be cutting off their phone. I'd be cutting off their allowance. You're doing everything you can to keep them safe. And unfortunately, that meant that they didn't have contact with her. They thought she was in Chilliwack with friends. And it wasn't until they saw a Facebook comment from someone they thought she was with on her Facebook, being like, "Where are you?" or whatever, or it was her birthday and she missed her birthday, that they reached out to that. And by the way, I've heard that from the person, not the parents, but the person claims that she got a call being like, are you not with Jodi?
Wow.
He's
Okay.
like, no. And that's when obviously these poor people's worlds fell apart.
Yeah, and they're already a couple days out. Then, like, if she's not where we thought she was, then they're playing catch up to try to figure it out. I believe it's Wednesday that her parents go to the police station and report her missing.
So there was a police officer on Bowen called Don Southern, and I'm not sure how the game of phone tag went, but I know because I work with, I don't pay him, so I don't know if work with so they're right. But Peter Cross, who was the lead investigator on Jodi's case, is a very integral part of our team on this investigation.
Mhm.
He was based on the mainland, like Squamish and West Van kind of area. And he got the call from Dawn, who was on Bowen, there's a girl missing. And Pete and his team went to Bowen
Okay.
straight away. And by the way, ask me 3 years ago, I would have shit talked the police for till the wee hours of the morning with you. But see, now that I've like worked with Pete, these officers have all lost sleep over this case. They were so diligent, like working till 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. with like toddlers and families back home. And they're
Mhm.
just like over there trying to do it. But like you and I know they were 5 days late. And that's
Mhm.
not their fault. It's nobody's fault. But they were 5 days late. And I think you and I both know the statistics
Mhm.
for what happens if you're not on the scene within the first 48 hours.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. So they're playing catch up. Everybody's memories 5 days foggier. Not to mention, the fogginess that would be associated with that party and drugs and alcohol and everything else. But they seem to take it very seriously right off the bat, and maybe that is because she hadn't been seen for several days. But now I know with your work, you've gone back and almost done like a complete reinvestigation of every aspect of this story. So I think you're well suited to tell me about the early days of the search. Was there a ground search? What were they, what did they do to try to find her? Of course, they didn't come up with anything notable, at least that I know of, but walk me through the early days of the actual search for Jodi.
It's been really strange because so Pete's, yeah, I don't think you'll mind me saying his age. He's 70 and this was 15 years ago and it's an active case. So like I can never read this file.
Hmm.
Like I will never see this file. And so the first few years of our investigation was retracing or like redoing the investigation.
Hmm.
And so when Pete came onto the team a couple of years ago and I was kind of walking him through everything I'd done, he was like, okay, now you've caught up to where we were. So now it's our job to overtake where we were. And
Wow.
that was such an interesting moment for me because I was like, okay, it's taken me 2 years to like catch up to where they were. And but
Uh,
like could have had a better team than me and Pete and Zena and someone he works with like on this plus Amelia with her bone connection. So it's
mm.
awesome.
Maybe
Um
just a bit a sidetrack here is how did you connect with him and get him involved? Like if you set out to do a documentary or even just set out to understand the story, he's like the perfect guy to get in on, like to get on your team. How did that happen?
I know what a dream.
Mhm.
Because Amelia told me his name, and then he has a blog, where he discusses RCMP cases and different laws, and he's very educated and an excellent writer. Don't tell him I said that. And so I reached out via the blog, and I think he was a bit like, okay, like he was a homicide detective for 35 years. So like I
Mhm.
will not be the first or the last annoying person to like hit up his email inbox. But then obviously I just charmed him. And then now we're best friends and I call him partner and he's like, please
Oh,
stop calling me that. But
oh,
I could not speak more highly of a person. And now I feel sad that I think a lot of the attitude towards this case is like, well, the police must have messed it up. Like, how did they not find her? The police must have messed it up. But actually, they were climbing up a steep hill.
I think it says something about his interest and commitment to the case that at this point in his life, he's, still willing to work on it. And it seems like that's what he's doing. He's not like serving as an interviewee for you in your project. He's hitting the ground running alongside you.
Yeah, it started as me being like, could I interview you for this documentary? And then within a second of meeting him, he's like, well, we could do this, or we could do this, or we should go to Bowen, and why don't we go knock on this person's door? And straight away, I was like, I need you in my life. Like, add to my favorites list. Like, this person. Sometimes the documentary comes second, and I say sometimes all the time now, the documentary comes second, and the investigation comes first, especially as we're inching closer and closer to, like, when I say ending, I don't even mean ending of the documentary. I mean the ending of this for everyone. Then we have to prioritize the investigation and like any case that might come as a result of
Mhm.
that. And so I don't want to mess that up with like documentary or narrative meddling, you know?
I understand. All of this was to understand the early days of the search. So, what did you learn about the initial investigation and what information they found and which direction that pointed them in? Like, how far did they get?
I think that a lot of teenagers, particularly teenagers in small towns, and not even just teenagers, people into their 20s and 30s, were doing illegal activities.
Mhm.
And I think that these people didn't understand the severity of the situation, and the fact that they might have sold a little bit of cocaine prevented them from fully cooperating with the police at that time.
Mhm.
And I think that that's what's worked so well for us, is that these people who were kind of like idiot teenagers, because we were all idiot teenagers, as we've talked about at length, are now in their 30s with kids and businesses, and they're like just a new perspective on life. And I think at that time, people just had this like, I definitely don't want the police coming in my house, and I definitely don't want to get involved in this
Mm.
situation, when they thought they didn't know anything. But now we have like hindsight and the ability to ask like very specific questions that the answer is yes or no. And I think these people that we've been speaking to, I mean, we've spoken with literally hundreds of islanders, literally. So they've been surprised at the knowledge that they've had, because in the moment, the police didn't have enough time to even be able to ask the right question. Not the right, they weren't asking the wrong questions, but they're like, oh, did you see anything? No. Okay, well, whereas I can be like, did you see this very specific thing that on the face of it has nothing to do with this? And oh yeah, I did. Oh, okay,
Mhm.
well, now you're a key person for us.
Yeah. Well, being able to collect all the information and then go ask the questions is different than the initial investigation where it's just, tell me what you know and I'm going to go talk to someone else afterwards. It's a different, like you're coming at it from a different perspective, I guess.
Yes.
That's fair to say. Now, at which point, I can only imagine Gavin was a person of interest. Do you know what kind of attention he got from the police, and what information did he give them? Because certainly, they're like his door is going to be one of the first they knock on.
But yes, Gavin was the primary person of interest from the police at that time. And as of yet, we have been unable to move him out of that hot seat.
Hmm. Okay, and I don't know if you can comment on this, but I've also read that Gavin suggested that they were arguing that night. When they were last seen, they may have even have been arguing on the side of the road, and that a part of the argument had to do with Jodi wanting him to drive her and maybe the two of them to go to like Calgary or some other city. And I just think it's that's worth commenting on. It is his side of the story that her last moments were discussing leaving Bowen Island and taking off somewhere.
You obviously read what I read, but then just to kind of add to that, there's a Facebook group called Let's Find Jodi Henrickson. And one of the things that really struck me as interesting in the immediate aftermath of her disappearance is that Gavin was very active on that group,
Mm.
critical of the police for looking at Bowen and saying that he was going to go put up posters in Chilliwack and different areas on the mainland. So it seemed like he was kind of propagating two narratives, one that had her going to Calgary, and one that she had gone to meet friends in Chilliwack and
Oh.
disappeared that way.
I didn't realize he was involved in the Facebook group and stuff, like publicly involved in the search, at least to that extent. That's new to me.
Go
So,
on it. I honestly, I don't know if they're still there, but it was so funny because see, like 4 years ago when I started this, I screenshotted everything. And then it's been so funny as more and more people have kind of found out what we're doing, the amount of things that have disappeared. And I'm like,
uh,
whoa, I did that. But he was saying, yeah, let's go put up posters and blah, 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 like a very public facing, helpful persona.
interesting. Now, again, we've talked about this. Bowen Island's not a large island. Can you talk to to the extent of ground searching and ground searches? Like, it just seems like in a confined space like that, it would be kind of an ideal spot to conduct a large scale ground search. Could you could likely cover the entire place?
Hmm. I mean, I thought the same when I started all this, and they did search a very specific area. Um, it's mainly kind of very Pacific Northwest foresty.
Hmm.
So there's like two or three main peaks um that are just covered in forest. So like technically could people band together and search every inch of the island? Um yeah, but we all know the Canadian policing system, how the RCMP works, whose jurisdiction does Bowen even fall under. Bowen doesn't have a homicide unit, definitely doesn't have a missing persons unit. And Pete's unit were responsible for a large chunk of this area on the mainland. So, yes, they did a search and yes, they investigated this. But as time went on, they got drawn in other directions with other perhaps more pressing cases. And I think that's the really sad thing for her family is like, oh, can you tell me the date that people stopped caring enough to be there every day? And it's not that they stopped caring, it's just it's an infrastructure, it's a business, and they got redeployed.
Hmm. Yeah, oh, that's dark to think about that the time came where people, for whatever reason, had to walk away from the search. Now, it's at this point of us talking, 15 years have passed since her disappearance and these searches have happened. Has there been any like major development or break or smoking gun piece of evidence that has surfaced, or are we still at the same point we would have been in June of 2009?
I cannot tell you about the police because I don't know. It's an active file. I'm
Okay.
not a police officer. So whenever I speak with the police, it's me telling them things and then a very uncomfortable silence where they basically don't respond.
Yeah, you just hear them like writing on paper and they're like, "Thank you."
We've gone in to present to them things that we have found. And I don't know in their blank stares if it's in the file or they know or what they're going to do with the information after. But when you talk about new evidence or smoking guns, something I've learned through this process is the standard of evidence required by the court of law is so high. And I cannot tell you how many times over the past really year that I've been on the phone with Pete and Zena, like, oh my gosh, like this is it. Like we have it. Oh my gosh. And Pete's like, it's circumstantial. That's circumstantial. I'm like,
Mm,
how is this circumstantial at this point? But the bar is really high. So right now, it's not my job to have a smoking gun. That's the police's job. I
mhm,
tell them that everything we found and what they choose to do with that is none of my business.
mhm.
So I do want to tell you, see this other person that we are been unable to rule out. We did
Hmm.
go in and kind of do a full presentation to the police on this person because it's my understanding that that person's name was not raised to the police at the time. It's my
Okay.
understanding that that name was new to them. I might be wrong, but it's my
Mhm.
understanding. So we had this multiple sources come forward with this other person. And when I looked into this other person, their criminal records, like drugs, assault, guns, drugs, assault,
Oh,
guns.
okay.
I'm interviewing all these people who talk about, all the men say, oh, he was a lovely guy. All the women say, oh, he beat the crap out of me. And
Oh,
so that's why there's always that 1% in my head that is like, until I can rule out one of these men, then both of them are innocent in my eyes.
yeah. This other person that you haven't been able to rule out, are you able to tell me a bit about them?
He's
Because
dead. He's
he's
dead.
dead.
He died
In
under very um questionable circumstances in 2022.
in 2020. Okay. And can you tell me what led you to link him to possibly being one of the people you needed to rule out? Like what made him need to be ruled out by you?
It started very casually. I was obviously treating Gavin as a suspect because he was the last person seen with Jodi. So,
Mm,
that's part of my job. In the same way I looked into the runaway, I looked into the drugs, I looked at it. It's like you were seen with her last. So unfortunately, that puts you on this list. And
mhm,
I said to a source, oh, I just like, if something terrible had happened to me, if a terrible accident had happened, let's say, um, and someone I was with ended up dead, I would have called my dad, like,
mhm.
because well, I wouldn't know what to do. And she said, oh, he wouldn't have called his dad, he would have called. And that is the first time I heard that name. And then after that, there was this weird, like, it was coming up and up, and oh, he used to live in this house, and oh, he was dating this person, and oh, he sold this, and oh, he'd been convicted of this. And then we set up the tip line, and I start getting people calling in telling me that they'd heard he was involved in this.
Oh,
So
okay.
that was very surprising. It was just very surprising. But as like an unbiased journalist, I have to treat both these leads equally.
Mhm.
And I have been working with Pete and Zena and Amelia night and day to try and disprove either one of these men. And as of yet, we have been unable to.
In this now deceased man, is there anything to connect him to Jodi that night? Like, was he someone who would have been at the party or seen with her? Like, or is it just the sketchy guy who would have been associated with Bowen Island?
It's funny because he wasn't even considered particularly sketchy on Bowen. Um, there is potentially a connection that evening. And annoyingly for me, the only person who could answer my very specific questions on that is the other person of interest in this case. So,
Gavin. Hmm. And you made it clear that a lot of people associated with Jodi and this night and friends and family have been supportive and involved in some way with the film that you're working on, the documentary you're putting together. I think it's pretty clear that Gavin hasn't been involved in any way. Like I can only assume you've tried to connect with him. Have you been unable to reach him, or did he deny talking to you? Like, can you tell me about that?
you know what, and I'll be very honest with you, I have not contacted him directly. I've spoken with people in his circle because a lot of this in general is me saying to people, you can trust me, you can talk to me, this is anonymous. And often I will go to through people to get to people.
Okay.
And I think he is the one person that, like, any other source, you're totally anonymous. I never have to tell people your name. This is just between you and me. Him, I can't look him in the eye and say that. So there's
Yeah.
like, it's really tricky.
Hmm. Interesting. Now, you know the story as good or better than anybody. And you've been following it, and if not following it, leading it over the last several years. Do you like? What are your thoughts on will this be solved? Like, do you think your piece is going to lead to justice or accountability or at least an answer?
Yeah.
And does it have to? Like, are you going to accept putting something together that doesn't have a definitive end?
As of yet, I've not accepted that, which is why people keep saying, when's it going to be released? And I'm like, well, like the best case scenario for me is documenting the police ending this case. That's my
Hmm.
dream. That's the
Yeah.
dream. There is no part of me that wants to release a documentary that's like, hey, here's how this happened and here's who did it. That means nothing.
Hmm.
Like, which is why I'm a terrible producer and I've gotten way too involved in this because if I was good at my job, this thing would already be on our favorite streamer because there's been so many twists and turns. And see those moments that I'm like, oh my gosh, we have it. As an audience member or as a general member of the public, you also would be like, oh, they have it, they've done it, it's great. But it's almost like that's where the waters have become really muddied because it's
Mm.
my dream is for the ending of this to be the police taking it over the finish line and me filming it versus
Mm.
taking it over the finish line because my finish line doesn't matter
Hmm. That's right.
unless
Yeah,
I find her.
I understand. Now, for people who are listening, I'm sure a lot of them are going to want to follow the progress in putting this together. Where can people follow your work or follow the discussion around Jodi's disappearance or even just learn more about the case than we were able to get into tonight? Like give me some spots that we can go to follow along with us.
Totally. So I would guarantee that everyone's going to go read Neil Boyd's article on Vancouver Magazine because that was the first real coverage of this that I saw. And I believe the only thorough coverage of this that I
The only thorough thing I found was that. Now, I'll link to it in my episode description for people who want to read it.
definitely.
Mm.
For me personally, we're not running a like forum or anything like that because the only time I really need people to speak to me is if they've heard something or they've encountered someone affiliated with this case. We're really looking at people in Alberta because both of the individuals that we've talked about have a history of living in Alberta. So if you have encountered someone who's affiliated with this case or heard part of a story or work in Fort Mac or one of those places and think, oh, someone said something weird to you once and you'd never connected it with Jodi Henrickson because you've never heard her name, then you can either email us findingjodi@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram at findingjodih. And on that Instagram page, we have a link to a Google form which you can submit anonymously. So I never have to know who sent me whatever they want to send me. You can call 236-712-3349. That's our anonymous tip line. And if you're looking for like general updates or what's going on, the Let's Find Jodi Henrickson Facebook page is run by her family. And honestly, any attention or people who want to make donations to domestic violence charities or anything like that, all of that should head to that Facebook page because at the end of the day, this is about Jodi. Her family are Jodi, and those are the people that I wish they don't want attention. They're not those kind of people, but I'm not her sister. You know, she has family who really love her, and any well wishes or any measures of support can be put on there.
I want to thank you for joining Jenni and I for this episode of Nighttime. I fully intend to provide additional coverage of Jodi's case, and I invite anyone interested in taking part to contact me at nighttimepodcast@gmail.com. I'd be specifically interested in speaking with anyone who was on Bowen Island with Jodi that night. And of course, I'd be very much interested in speaking with her ex-boyfriend Gavin. Gavin, if you're interested in sharing your memories of that night publicly, I'll offer you a safe place to do it. If anyone would like to reach Jenni and the film crew, they could be contacted at findingjodi@gmail.com. And of course, if anyone has any information that could help law enforcement solve this case, please do the right thing and contact police immediately. If you're afraid to do it, you can email me or the filmmakers, and we'll be happy to do it for you. Jodi's family needs answers, and Jodi deserves to be found. And with all that said, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before we part, let me end with some thanks. First, a huge thanks to Jenni for sharing some time with me and with you, the listeners of Nighttime. A big shout out to Monty, Datta, who contributes the music for this episode, and LJ from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides my intro and outro voiceovers. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to each and every one of you listening to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. On the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Derek, Jordan, and Chris, I appreciate you. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, you can do it in a variety of ways. First of all, a premium feed subscription costs just a couple dollars a month, and that money funds the creation of new episodes. But the premium feed will also give you those episodes 2 days early, get them to you ad-free, and give you access to a full back catalog of episodes. That sounds like something you're interested in. You can go premium right now at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still support the growth of this show by sharing this episode on social media and letting all your like-minded friends know why you're listening. Your support is very much appreciated. Now until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.